Thanks for meeting us.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. You guys want to come in and get out of the heat?
This is Into the Mix, a podcast about joy and justice, produced with Vox Creative. I'm Ashley C. Ford, and this week we're in Florida.
I mean, Florida heat is a real thing.
And we're here for one thing: ice cream.
The cool thing about Florida is it's ice cream season year-round.
I mean, this is a Ben & Jerry's podcast after all.
I think
It's ice cream time.
oh, man.
So my daughter Nia has a saying in our house: a day without dessert is a disaster. And we live by it, whether it's just a little small scoop of ice cream or something.
It's true.
Okay, so we're not actually in Florida just for the ice cream. We're here to meet Antonio McBroom.
I've never done ice cream during an interview before.
That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if they can hear us eating it.
Honestly, I think that's a positive here.
We're sitting with Antonio in a Ben & Jerry's scoop shop in Clearwater Beach, Florida, just outside of Tampa. Customers are lining up in nothing but swimsuits. It's Ben & Jerry's Clearwater Beach. No shirt, no shoes, no service. Doesn't apply here.
So we've got a specific Clearwater Beach mural that, tourists just love. If you're walking by, even if you don't come in to get ice cream, this is a great place to stop, have some fun, take some pictures, create some memories. We do live DJ, karaoke. This is a place where folks just come to have fun.
Antonio is the owner of this Ben & Jerry's scoop shop and about 24 others. But owning a Ben & Jerry's scoop shop in Florida has always been a dream of Antonio's. And that's because Antonio really loves Florida.
Florida is development ground zero, and there's such excitement about this part of our country. So many folks are moving. The net positive folks moving to Florida each day. So this is going to be a key area in kind of shaping the vision and future for what Florida can be and the relevance it can have. And I think places like Florida where it's not just one way or another, right? There's a lot of folks in Florida that are really progressive, that are really understanding.
Even though we're sitting in a beachside Ben & Jerry's scoop shop,
Give us a little tour of the store.
Oh man, so this store is one of my favorites because we actually designed it. I've got to tell you the story behind the store. So
that smells
it's
like
really
a
incredible.
warm, waffly dreamscape.
Man, I love this cone, yo.
Doing our best attempt at speaking while ice cream eating.
I'm taking an ice cream break.
It's very clear that Antonio cares about a lot more than ice cream.
We've heard those rumblings from some fellow business owners. Why don't you just sell ice cream? And that's not who we are, right? Ice cream is in the different businesses we do are our platform to really make impact.
While Antonio may love Florida, he doesn't love everything that's happening here. In 2022, Antonio's Ben & Jerry's franchise business, Primo Partners, became one of 3 plaintiffs in a case against a new Florida law, a law that made it impossible for his business to operate in Florida.
So today, we are going to be introducing to the public a new piece of legislation for the upcoming legislative session.
The law was coined the Individual Freedom Act, or the more clunky
Stop Wrongs Against Our Kids and Employees Act.
Or, if you want to make it an acronym, which we know politicians love to do,
The Stop Woke Act.
the Stop Woke Act. Like Antonio said, Florida is ground zero, but not just for great places to open new scoop shops. Florida is ground zero for a nationwide backlash against the free and honest discussion of inequality and injustice. This backlash has manifested as state laws targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, better known as DEI, in businesses, and in some cases, lessons about inequality in schools. Champions of these laws have claimed that what they are trying to curb is anything they deem too quote-unquote woke. And Florida is only one battlefield in what many a pundit have called the war on woke. Today on Into the Mix, the first part of our last mini-series for this season. Episode 1, It's Not About Ice Cream. Let's get into it.
Come December of 2021, Governor DeSantis had declared a war on woke, and that was his refrain, for months, that he was declaring a war on woke, that Florida famously is a place where woke goes to die.
This is Shalini Goel Argawal. She's an attorney at Protect Democracy.
Essentially, that's what being woke means, right, is aware of injustice. And this was a foghorn saying, no, we absolutely will not be awake to such inequality.
The word woke was born in the Black community. The phrase stay woke has been part of African American vernacular English as far back as the 1930s, when it was recorded at the end of a Leadbelly song. The phrase stay woke has been a warning to Black people to stay aware of the power majority's attempts to pull the wool over their eyes, way before it was weaponized. It's about keeping your eyes open and acknowledging the reality of anti-Black injustice, which is why co-opting it for some sort of political purpose, like claiming to stop woke, is such a bastardization.
It's almost a war on Blackness. Because it's unacceptable to say it's a war on Blackness, we've now got these other terms that folks have employed, like wokeness or DEI or CRT. Put your boogeyman of choice in there.
Shalini is Antonio's attorney and represents all the plaintiffs in the case against the Stop Woke Act. But before we get into how the law was fought, we need to talk about its inception. Why and how it came to be in the first place.
The Stop Woke Act is the descendant of a executive order issued by then-President Trump that sought to penalize federal government contractors who used diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings as part of their businesses, and said that those folks basically could not then engage in federal contracting. And that was quickly struck down as unconstitutional because it seems pretty un-American to say that, people cannot voice certain words, but that is what the executive order said, that you couldn't express support for things having to do with racial justice or recognizing gender inequality, some big topics in American life and definitely in the workplace.
In the final months of his presidency, the Trump administration issued a, quote, executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping, end quote. As Shalini said, this order tried to block federal contractors from using DEI training. A federal judge blocked the order a few months later, and it was officially revoked the day President Biden took office. But the executive order built scaffolding for many state lawmakers to draft up their own restrictions on DEI. DEI in practice has actually been used in organizations since the 1960s. It can be applied as trainings on implicit bias in the workplace, diversifying hiring practices, or even systemically changing the way an organization runs to make it more equitable. For some people, these workplace trainings may be one of the only places they are required to confront structural racism and how it manifests in everyday life. As it applies to businesses, the Stop Woke Act determines that workplaces with 15 or more employees cannot require employees to participate in any form of training that supports the existence of privilege or oppression based on different identities, i.e., diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings.
And the law basically listed out certain concepts and said employers could not say anything in support of those concepts or to advance them, espouse them, in any way promote them. But they could certainly say things to discredit them or criticize them. That was permissible. So it was very clearly weighing in on one side of the debate, that if an employer agreed with what the governor wanted them to say, they could speak. If they did not, they could not speak to their employees about these concepts.
And though Florida might have won the competition for most memeable name for a law, it's not the only state to try to curb DEI. Following the murder of George Floyd and the uprisings that followed, there was a reckoning of sorts that happened across the country. And this reckoning came with a 55% increase in DEI roles in 2020 alone, across sectors. Implementing and strengthening their DEI programs were many organizations' response to dismantling systems of white supremacy in their institutions.
I think in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, there was a burgeoning recognition among a lot of businesses that they needed to take more substantial steps to take stock of where their industries had benefited from systemic racial inequality, and then to take active steps to counter that.
During this time, it seemed like every big company and their mom was publicly expressing their support for their Black employees and promising to do better. Some tangible changes were actually made, but there were also a lot of feeble changes masqueraded across corporate Instagram feeds. And this rapid wave was met with a ferocious backlash. Then came along Alabama SB 129, prohibits certain programs related to divisive concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Arizona SB 1694, public colleges can't require employees to engage with DEI training. Oregon HB, Kentucky SB 6, and North Carolina HB 6, eliminates DEI practices in higher ed, race and sex-based scholarships in public colleges. And South Montana SB 221 prohibits the unlawful SB discriminatory practice South Carolina of diversity training as an addition of and of course, Florida HB 7/SB 148, the Stop Woke Act. Most of these bills didn't make it out of the State House, but several are still pending, and a few have actually made it into law. One of those that made it into law, the Stop Woke Act. It was signed into law in July of 2022. Luckily, the Stop Woke Act was immediately hit with legal opposition from Protect Democracy for the elements of the law that targeted DEI in businesses, and by the ACLU for the aspects that targeted speech in public education.
The lawsuit alleges that the Stop Woke Act violates the First Amendment because you can tell by its very name, it's saying to stop woke, that it is discriminating against a certain viewpoint, and that violates free speech of businesses. The second claim we made also was that it is impermissibly vague, such that it chills speech beyond what it may have even intended to silence, so that any reasonable employer would just shy away from talking about race or gender or national origin at all for fear that they were not being sufficiently objective or by addressing a topic inadvertently advancing some position on it.
So technically, the Stop Woke Act allows employers to mention race, sex, nationality, etc., but only mention it. What is prohibited is saying anything that adds belief or value to the conversation. Specifically, a belief or value that challenges the status quo, or really the status quo as defined by those writing the law. It would be like saying, yes, there are in fact people of many different racial identities, but nothing more. But saying There are people of many different racial identities, some of whom have perpetuated systemic oppression against others through time and space, and into this very beige-colored conference room we're sitting in? Nuh-uh. That's just too woke.
And then, in addition, the law had this really hazy clause that said that an employer can discuss the concept so long as they do so without endorsement. And it is a really curious thing to think about how one might be able to talk about implicit bias or to talk about racial inequality without also noting that that is a thing that should be addressed without taking an endorsing position that this is an injustice that should be addressed.
The part of the Stop Woke Act that targeted DEI was enjoined or temporarily blocked by a judge only a few months after it was signed, thanks to the Project Democracy lawsuit. Even so, its mere existence had drastic consequences for businesses across Florida.
The law had an extreme chilling effect. As soon as it was passed, we talked to so many businesses who were really concerned about how this threatened their day-to-day operations, but also at the same time felt really scared about trying to put their neck out there and expose themselves to political blowback from DeSantis, who is, known for being a somewhat vindictive politician.
By the time the Stop Woke Act was written, Governor DeSantis had already made a name for himself as someone who likes to retaliate against those who don't like his laws. The most public retaliation was a very complicated and multifaceted battle with Disney. This conflict created a blanket of fear across the state's business community.
But it was really chilling because I think all businesses in Florida and beyond got the idea that if I say anything that is contrary to what the governor says I should say, I will be directly penalized. And that was the climate in which we were reaching out to businesses to ask them to, join this lawsuit and, obviously make themselves to some degree a target for the governor.
So many businesses were able to drop their DEI programming and wait out the storm. These were the businesses unwilling to sign on to the lawsuit. But for other businesses, there wasn't a way to just shed a DEI department and stop talking about inequality. Talking about and addressing inequality was at the very core of their business, even if this wasn't obvious to consumers. And we'll come back to that after the break.
Chocolate ice cream with fudge-covered pretzel pieces
Okay,
and pretzel
this is a bit
swirls.
different than most ice cream because it's a little bit salty.
We're back with Antonio McBroom at the Ben & Jerry's Scoop Shop in Clearwater, Florida.
I'll do that one, Salt.
Though he says this shop is one of his favorites, it's far from the first one he owned.
So my family's in town. It's graduation weekend, right? So they're excited about somebody in our family's graduating. I was the second graduate ever. My mom had graduated from North Carolina A&T back in the 80s, and nobody graduated since. And so this was a big deal for graduation. But then to compound it, there was this potential business activity that was happening that had never happened in our family before.
Antonio worked at Ben & Jerry's Scoop Shop throughout his time at UNC Chapel Hill. And while working toward a degree, he also rose in the ranks in the shop. And the day he received his diploma, he also received the keys to his very first shop.
And everybody came into the store, and I was able to just give them some ice cream because it was mine. That felt really good, right? And that's how we kicked off graduation weekend. And it just turned into a just epic day, epic weekend. And, it started to really settle in with me that following week as I graduated, and the dust had settled. And it's like, all right, now I got to get back to the grind. We've got orders to make. I got a schedule to make. And then all these ideas and stuff that I'd put in my business plan, it's time to start enacting them. It's time to start making it happen.
While Antonio was in college, he earned a dual education, one in the classroom and one in the scoop shop. It was like majoring in math with a minor in how to make a successful business run.
So I was working at Ben & Jerry's when I was a student at UNC Chapel Hill back in 2004, 20 years ago. 20 years ago this month is whenever I got going with Ben & Jerry's. Yeah, and so as I was scooping, my first year, now I kind of scooped my way up to a shift leader, and I became a store manager. And see, I was a math major while I was in college, right? And so as I was managing the shop, I could see like invoices of like the deliveries and stuff coming in, and I could kind of do math, and I learned the difference in wholesale versus retail. And I was like, okay, this could be interesting on the other side of this table. And I saw a lot of promise that if I were really the decision maker with the business that I was running, I saw a lot of promise in growing it. I'm about to graduate. I'm trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I really like what I'm doing right now. Let's take it to another level. And, what if we tried to buy this store that I was working at? And so that was the origin of Primo.
As a brand new college graduate, Antonio was already the owner of a Ben & Jerry's scoop shop. In the years following, he started his own franchise business, Primo Partners, which now owns 23 scoop shops across the South and Midwest. Antonio leads Primo along with his mentor, Eric, and his mentee, Philip, the latter of whom started at Primo as a marketing intern and is now the chief operations officer.
Primo is a double entendre. It has two different meanings. In Spanish, primo means cousin. And so my cousin, Eric Taylor, and I started the company. And the other meaning of primo in Black urban culture is creme de la creme.
That sort of rising through the ranks pattern is actually just as central to Primo Partners' mission as is using ice cream to brighten someone's day. Built into their business model is a goal of growing opportunities for marginalized communities through mentoring, coaching, and leadership. Primo Partners is Black-owned and Black-led and is committed to improving racial and socioeconomic equity in each community they serve.
I had this team, I had this staff. Now that I was owning a business, I felt like my staff is my family, right? And I'm really vested in their leadership growth and development. I quickly saw that this spirit of education, right? My mom was a teacher, and I had a calling on my life for education. It didn't go anywhere just because I chose the business route. And I looked at my business as my classroom. And so my team's development became like the most important thing to me as I was growing the business is, can I help coach these young leaders from where they are to where they want to be?
For Antonio and Primo Partners, ice cream is simply a very delicious vehicle to drive education, learning, and empowerment opportunities for people who have experienced oppression. And in turn, their business model is a perhaps less delicious vehicle to bring about change.
Other areas are focused on activism and how to become a change maker in your community, right? How do you take some of the learnings that you have becoming a scooper or a shift leader at Ben & Jerry's and actually do something in your community, actually find a need. Let's say, you see, a part of your community that doesn't have the representation that you think it should.
It's really interesting because when we were going to be starting this conversation and I was looking things up about you, I was thinking, oh, what an interesting businessman. And then I speak with you and I understand that probably the reason why I felt that way is that it's very clear to me you're not a businessman. You are a man in business.
Oh, wow.
And you've put your humanity before the business part of it. And it's interesting because you've been successful in the business. You obviously care about the business. You care about what it does and the impact of your work, of your influence on the people who work with you. But you've made the humanity the center, which seems like it's almost, please forgive the small joke here, but it seems a little bit like a secret ingredient.
Yeah, I love that secret ingredient piece. You wouldn't believe this. Just above my desk at home, I've got a a framed quote, and it says, it's a Jay-Z quote. It says, "I'm not a businessman, I'm a business man." I like how you remixed that. I love how you remixed that and said, it's not that you're a businessman, you're a man in business. I love that.
If running a business to Antonio was simply selling ice cream, turning a profit, and expanding into new cities, if Antonio was simply a businessman, we probably wouldn't be sharing his story right now. Antonio has never been just about the business or the ice cream, and this became even more clear to him after he opened his first shop in Florida, and when, soon after, the governor signed the Stop Woke Act.
Growth is a core value of Primo, and one of the ways that we grow, one of the tangible ways we grow, is that we keep learning. And so team learning is big for us, and we learn about, best practice ways to do our business and operations, and we have consultants come in and do trainings for us. We read books, but we also do that as it relates to our impact work and our social mission. And so the documentary by Ava DuVernay, 13th, was on Netflix. And one of the things that we said we wanted to do that coming quarter was our leadership team and management team, we wanted to, kind of watch this documentary and have a series of discussions about it. And one of our managers just kind of voiced some concern and made me aware about what was going on in Florida. Hey, we got this message the other day about this bill that's going to make it where a lot of the stuff we do with our business, isn't necessarily legal. And I became pretty infuriated about somebody actually doing that. And so, we as business leaders were just like, man, this we can't sit back and sit on the sidelines with this. This is going to fundamentally impact the purpose and cause and passion behind my business, Primo, right? To break down barriers and create growth opportunities for people like me.
The news of the Stop Woke Act and what it entailed made it clear to Antonio that Primo Partners would not be able to run their business in Florida. Yes, they'd still be able to sell ice cream, but ice cream is not the whole point of Primo Partners.
A number of advocates and folks in the business community who were alarmed, frankly, by the kind of rhetoric coming from the governor's office and the law that was proposed and ultimately passed. Because as we all know, addressing topics relating to racial inequality or relating to gender inequality are central to a lot of businesses, in part because those inequalities exist. Their clientele and their employees expect them to address those issues because they're manifest in the way that the business runs.
The core mission of Primo Partners is to create new opportunities for people whose racial, gender, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds have made it harder to access business and education opportunities. Essentially, the very core mission of Primo Partners wouldn't be permissible under the Stop Woke Act.
So that at the core is what I think we've been really good at with Primo, is just showing what's possible, showing that a Black-owned, majority, people of color-led organization can thrive, and that a lot of the both conscious and subconscious bias that is really prevalent in the workplace, in all kinds of selection criteria in banking and finance. And, these things aren't real. We can be intentional about addressing it. But then it was like, this can also make the road forward for future business owners, current business owners and future business owners, future business leaders. This can make their path even more difficult. If we literally cannot address the real challenges of our marketplace, the real challenges historically that have led to this, if we can't be intentional and talk about that in the workplace, it's a threat to our democracy. And so that was what really elevated me to take the actions that we did against Stop Woke.
In the summer of 2022, when the Stop Woke Act was signed, Antonio and Primo Partners joined the lawsuit against the aspects of the Stop Woke Act that targeted businesses. Represented by Shalini Argwal and Protect Democracy, Primo Partners joined a Clearwater-based honeymoon company and Fort Lauderdale-based DEI consultant.
I can't say enough about Antonio and Primo Partners and Honey Fund, Sarah Margulis, the CEO there, and Shavara Oren for, their bravery in stepping up and saying, no, we think this is wrong, and we are going to stand up no matter the consequences.
Only 3 businesses in the entire state signed on as plaintiffs, knowing that their joining was a huge risk. But each of the plaintiffs of the lawsuit was able to present evidence that central aspects of their business would become impossible under the terms of the Stop Woke Act. And the story of Primo Partners is not unique. There are countless businesses in Florida and in other states with anti-DEI laws that would not be able to operate under these restrictions. They would not be able to run their businesses without directly addressing topics of inequality on the basis of race, sex, or national origin with their employees. It's as simple as that.
We filed our lawsuit in June of 2022. The law was supposed to go into effect in July 1 of that year. It did go into effect. We also sought a preliminary injunction, which is basically asking the court to really quickly stop the law because it's so clearly unconstitutional. And we had a hearing a couple of months later, and the trial judge said, yes, this seems very likely unconstitutional, and so I am going to enjoin the law. The state appealed that decision, and we went before the 11th Circuit, an appeals court governing Florida, and we got a unanimous ruling, a really strong decision from all 3 judges affirming that, yes, the Stop Woke Act is, as you might guess, viewpoint discrimination, and it's unconstitutional. So the law is currently not in effect. It's not enforceable in Florida.
In March of 2024, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Florida ruled that the aspects of the Stop Woke Act that targeted DEI training in organizations with 15 or more employees was unconstitutional. So the Stop Woke Act, as it applies to business, is essentially dead in Florida. It cannot be enforced. If a business requires their employees to attend a DEI training, they can't be punished by the state. However, this does not mean the Stop Woke Act has stopped impacting the businesses and employees of Florida, because 1, there's always a chance the proponents of the law take the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, and 2, its vast chilling effect across the Florida business community was worse than that huge frost a few years back that froze like half of the state's oranges.
To me, it was some of the early signs of, backlash to just the generational advances that have been happening since 2020. Since all of this had happened, but really the tragic murder of George Floyd, spawned this response and awareness, heightened awareness around equity and justice that I was really happy to see in our country. I wasn't in any way happy of what happened to George Floyd, but just the response that many individuals took, as well as many companies and institutions and had taken after that. It was once in a generation. And when I saw Stop Woke, and I think we start to see now even more some of this kind of anti-DEI, anti-affirmative action, legislative and coordinated efforts, it's really a response from folks who weren't happy about that. And so to me, that was a big part of taking the action with Stop Woke.
For Antonio, fighting the Stop Woke Act wasn't only about protecting the core mission of Primo Partners. It was about something bigger than ice cream and Florida. It was justice.
That is why we should all be in this. Be energizing to all of us. Like, it's something that we should all be up in arms at, because it is hard for us as a country to ever move beyond this racial schism if we cannot ever frankly acknowledge that it exists. And that's effectively what a lot of activists, including Governor DeSantis in this moment, are trying to do.
Any progress our country has made in the last several years to actively combat racial inequality and forge a more just future seems at the point of crumbling down. I'm not gonna lie, it's dire. But a place where I find hope is in the ability of people to have conversations, change stuck beliefs, and learn new things. But it's 2024. Who am I kidding? Even that is at risk. That's for the next episode. Into the Mix is a Ben & Jerry's podcast produced with Vox Creative. This episode was written by Jules Bradley. The Vox Creative team includes lead producers Priscilla Alabi and Jules Bradley, production supervisor Taylor Henry, and production manager Jessica Bay. Martha D. Sally is our supervising producer. Anu Subramanian is our executive producer. The team also includes Amy Wenzel, Senior Manager of Creative Services, Michelle Blam, Associate Director of Project Management, Director of Post-Production Greg Russ, and Post-Production Manager Andrew Hammond. Kyle Neal engineered this episode. Felicia Dominguez is our junior engineer. Original music by Israel Tutson. A special thank you to Ajwa Jimabrimpong, our sensitivity reader, and Zoe Malik, our fact checker, for their expertise, and to Ariane Young for her support. The Ben & Jerry's team includes Jay Tandon, Jay Curley, Sanjana Mahesh, Chris Miller, and Palika Makam. We license clips from C-SPAN for this series. I'm Ashley C. Ford. Thank you for listening.
Vox Creative.